Going.
All right. Thank you very much. I'll be around at the end for questions too. If anybody isn't able to ask a question during the presentation, and you'll have my contact info at the end. Um, as was mentioned, the recording will be there for you if you'd like to refer to that afterwards. And also you can, you'll have access to the slide deck. So you can always refer to that if you need it to. So yeah, we have a lot to cover tonight, so let's get going. My name's Ted. I'm here courtesy of Plymouth Area Renewable Energy Initiative out of Plymouth, New Hampshire. They are the ones that coordinate the New Hampshire Saves presentations throughout the state of New Hampshire for the different utilities that are listed down there at the bottom of your screen. I believe you guys are all out there in Eversource territory, or is there some co-op out there too?
Liberty, Eversource, and Co-op.
Oh, that's right. You got some Liberty there too. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah. So you're in an interesting situation there. But this is what we're here to talk about tonight. And like you said, if you want to ask some questions, feel free. I will say that chances are we're probably going to cover whatever it is you're going to ask. So I may ask you to hold on to that question until we get to it. But like I said, let's move on. This is kind of a brief summary of what we're going to talk about tonight. We're going to go through some real basic stuff in the beginning, just about energy use and some real basic savings things. And then we get into talking about insulation, and we talk about what we call the ABCs of air sealing. And then you'll probably get a little bit overwhelmed at that point, and we'll talk about what you can actually do. This program is really dense in information. I talk very fast. I'm pretty passionate about this stuff, so don't be too overwhelmed if it gets to be too much. And then at the very end, we'll talk about the utility rebate programs in the program called New Hampshire Saves. And as I mentioned, you'll have access here to the slide deck through Parade. I usually start off when I'm doing this in person, like in a library or in a town hall, by asking people, like, what do you think is the greenest energy? And as you can imagine, so usually people first say solar. Solar's the greenest thing, and someone else might jump in and say, yeah, you know what, solar's good, but you got to mine the panels, and what do you do with them when you're done? So wood or biomass or wood pellets is actually the greenest thing. And then someone else will say, oh, well, what about wind? Wind doesn't cause any pollution. I mean, there's an argument to be made for all those different things, but my answer usually is you're all wrong, really. The greenest energy out there is the energy you're not using at all. I'm a big fan of solar. I just put solar on my house in February, actually, and I'm really, really glad that I don't have an electric bill anymore. But I've already done other things to reduce my energy load first. That's really the way, the order of going about doing it. So in other words, instead of thinking about, how can I produce my energy? How can I reduce my energy or conserve my energy first? That's the first step. And that's really why I got into doing energy audits. I was a teacher for about 20 years, and I was kind of getting burned out, and I was looking at doing something else, and I was going to maybe get into some kind of renewable energy field. Wasn't quite sure. And then I saw a bumper sticker one day. It said, the greenest energy is the energy you're not using. And that really kind of hit home with me. And, it's a big reason why I do what I do. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind. The other reason is that, we spend a lot of money here in New Hampshire on energy. Part of that's because we have such a darn long heating season. I had a customer from South Carolina recently, and during the energy audit, he actually asked, like, well, how much longer? And I said, I got about 20 minutes left. He said, no, how much longer do I have to heat this house? And I told him, end of April into May. And he said, 1, 2, 3. He said, that's 6 months. He had no clue. I mean, the Chamber of Commerce didn't tell him that when he called and said we might move to New Hampshire. They sold them on New Hampshire because we have no sales tax, no income tax. You got the mountains, the lakes, 4 seasons, beautiful communities and schools and all the stuff. What they don't tell you is, things like we have a 6-month heating season, and you have to use, most people are forced to use oil or propane. Where that fellow was from in South Carolina, you would use really cheap electricity or really cheap natural gas. And that's just not an option for most people in New Hampshire. So we spend a lot of energy on, a lot of money on our energy. The energy that we use is very expensive. We have one of the higher costs for energy in the United States. According to a recent thing here, it says that we're actually the 9th most expensive state in the United States. I actually thought it would be a little higher than that, but apparently that's where we're at. And most of the energy that you use in your home, or most of the money that you spend on energy, goes into keeping your house warm in the winter and cool in the summer if you have air conditioning. So things, I'm glad there's people out there coming up with better refrigerators and things like that. But, first of all, I'm not an engineer, so I can't really go into that field. And secondly, those people are only picking around at a very small piece of the pie here. So, from my point of view, if you want to have a big impact, the way to do it is to work on things to reduce the biggest piece of pie there, which is the space heating, which is the 40%. Electric bills are interesting. Everyone usually just kind of grumbles and pays it really quickly, but there's actually a little bit more to the bill. If you take a deeper look at it, you can maybe learn some things about how your house is using electricity. You can look at your usage over time, month to month. Usually it'll compare how you're doing like this month, this year to this month last year. It'll give you some averages and things like that. Some of the utilities have a little thing on there that tells you, how much more you're using compared to your neighbors, kind of thing. Honestly, I'm a little bit skeptical of that stuff sometimes because I don't really know exactly what kind of numbers they're using, and I'm not sure who they're comparing you against. They might be comparing you alone in a house to somebody who's got a big house with 4 or 5 kids. That's not really a fair comparison. So sometimes those things can be a little bit frustrating for folks, I know, but point is, take a look at your bill. There's a little bit more there that might help you. It's good to kind of generally know, in your house, what's using the most electric power. If you have an electric water heater, then that's almost definitely going to be the biggest electric consumption in your house. If you have some other type of way of heating up your water, then that top line wouldn't be there. And, your refrigerator and freezer would most likely be the next thing. Mostly because it's just the limitations of the technology, and also refrigerators are on all the time, right? So your clothes dryer is not as high because it doesn't really, you're not using that as much, or your entertainment center or your dishwasher, that kind of thing. Lighting is up there pretty high on this chart. I'm not exactly sure how old this chart might be. It might be a couple of years old. Now, I suspect that number on average is going to be going down significantly soon, just because most people are moving into LED lights. We'll talk about that in a few minutes, but that's, that can drop that column down pretty significantly. Again, and this is an average, so, this can vary from house to house and, depending on how many people you have and other different things. If you're wanting to do a little more research, you can get one of these little plug-in watt meters from the library. I think that every library used to have them. I'm not sure if they all do anymore, but you can take anything in your house and plug it in, and you can do a little math, and you can actually figure out, how much does this toaster or TV or light, cost me. And that can be kind of interesting. There's also these new whole house energy meters. This screenshot on the right here is from a brand called Sense. That's just one of the ones. Pretty neat because it actually goes on the electric panel itself, and it looks at your whole house, and it can actually identify the unique electrical signatures of all these different things. So you could be like at work and you could pick up your phone and be like, oh, look, it looks like my son just went to school because I just saw the garage door closed, and it looks like he left his light on. You can see these things in real time on your screen. And it keeps track over time, and it'll tell you, like, at this rate, this is how much you'll spend by the end of the day, or this is how much you'll spend by the end of the month. And this is a really handy tool for people who have sort of strangely high electric bills and they can't figure out why. Like, they've done a lot of things to reduce their bills, but they're still high. If you have let's say you had a well pump that was recirculating too much, or you had some kind of short somewhere in some other kind of like hardwired device, then the Sense or some other type of whole house electric meter would help you, get to the bottom of that. Whereas the little plug-in watt meter, really is only good for individual appliances. Looks like we had a question. Do you want to?
There's a question from Tom Klaus.
Okay.
Tom, go ahead.
Yeah. Where do mini splits fit into this equation as far as energy use?
Good question. because they're so new, we don't even have them listed as a part of that. I would say they're going to be up there pretty high because they're doing a pretty big role, right? Like they're heating and air conditioning your whole entire house. So they are super efficient. They're way more efficient than any other type of heating and cooling. But they are going to be up there. You know, if you have mini splits and you're using them a lot, that might actually jump up and could be, you know, high, probably even higher than your refrigerator or your electric water heater. On the positive side, you know, if you're heating your whole house with these, or most of your house, your propane or oil or your wood bill is going to be, you know, offset by that. So, and of course, that all depends also in terms of, you know, what kind of electric rates are you paying? Who's your utility? Have they raised up the rates again this year, like they did in other years? You know, for instance, my house, I have solar in my house now, and the solar is producing about 125% of my electric usage. So I have some room to kind of grow there. So eventually I'm going to be looking into getting a heat pump in my own house. So if you have solar, if you have a mini split combined with solar, then that changes the whole equation, because then you don't really care what the utility is paying or charging for electricity. And even if it is the biggest user in your house, you know, you're essentially getting your electricity from your own roof, so, or your own backyard if it's a ground mount. Good question. Now, we have a couple slides near the end about heat pumps for sure. Let's see. It does say here electrician to install. Technically, I think that's just kind of a CYA thing they put in here. It's actually marketed for homeowners to put in themselves. They do say that, you know, you ought to have a little bit of common sense and a little bit of understanding electric and things like that, because you do have to open up your electric panel. You have to put a clamp in. You have to put one wire in. So I would say, you know, technically speaking, you don't have to be an electrician to put these in, but you should have some, you know, some background in this. You know, this sounds really kind of silly maybe to put in here, but, you know, turn things off when you're not using them. You'd be surprised that, you know, my day job is doing energy audits for people. So these are people who are really interested in saving energy, learning how to save energy, invested in the process and wanting to learn. And there's sometimes where I'm in someone's house for an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours, and there'll be, you know, lights on in this one room that no one's even in, and then there's a TV on in the other room, and then there's a stereo going in another room and no one's even in there. There's a computer monitor on that the whole time while I'm there, and there's no one even going in that room. So I think a lot of us have really gotten into some bad habits over the years, and it really does make sense to start sort of, you know, take stock and think about how you're using your house and getting in the habit of turning things off when you're not using them. There are some things in your house that are always using power. We call those vampires or phantom loads. That would be anything with like a charger or a light or a clock. Even when you hit the button, it says OFF off. It's not actually off. It's still drawing a small amount of power. And if you have a whole bunch of those, it can actually add up. So you can eliminate those by, you know, using a power strip that's shown here. I mentioned LED lights. I can't say enough good things about LED lights. You know, when I first got into this, we were still putting in, you know, the little squiggly circular CFL bulbs, the ones that blink and they take forever to warm up and they have mercury in them. And there's just so many different problems with those. So I'm so glad we're beyond that. But the LED industry has really figured out how to do it. The LED lights now come on instantaneously. They use just a small fraction of the electricity that the bulbs they're replacing use. Sometimes I'll be putting in, say, 8 or 10 LED light bulbs in someone's kitchen in their recessed lights, say, and all of those lights put together, in some cases, aren't even using as much electricity as one bulb that I took out and we got rid of. So it really does make a big difference. They've come down in price really significantly in the last few years. Really no reason not to get them. What I would suggest is that you don't get fooled into getting the ones that say daylight. Daylight is wonderful. Everyone loves daylight, but in a house, in a light bulb, it's not a very attractive looking hue. It's the one on the bottom here in the picture that's more like a bluish hue. And in my experience, I think I've only had one customer in 12 years who liked that color. Everybody else likes the other color because it mimics an incandescent bulb. It mimics a candle, that kind of hue. And they call those warm white or soft white. If you want to get technical or scientific, you can look for the actual Kelvin number. It's either 2,700 or 3,000. Those would be the ones that you're looking for that have that little bit more of a natural hue to it, I think. You can get candelabras for your dining room table. You can get recessed lights. You can get floodlights. You can get reading lamps that go, low, medium, high. They have almost just about every type you could possibly want now. Obviously, if it's, if you have a dimmer, you got to make sure it'll work with the dimmer. But like I said, I can't say enough good things about the LED lights. If you haven't gotten, made that switch, it's definitely time to do that. Some other really easy things you can do, low flow shower heads. A lot of times people are afraid of those because they think it's just going to be like a little dribble of water, and it really isn't at all. In fact, some people say that it feels like there's more water coming out with a low flow shower head just because sometimes it comes out with more power. But every time you take a shower, then you're going to be saving energy. Pipe wrap is really inexpensive at the hardware store, really easy to put on. So every time you are running water, whether it's for your distribution system, if you have a boiler, or for your domestic, you'll be saving some energy there. A lot of people have their hot water heaters set a little too high, like 140, 150, which is not only dangerous, but it's kind of a waste of energy. So really, 120 at the tap is all you really need. And the last thing you can do is, think about washing your clothes in cold water. This shirt I'm wearing here, I think it's about 10 years old. It's never actually even seen any hot water, I don't think. If I have a really bad stained shirt or a pair of pants, sometimes I'll use hot water or warm water. But for most clothes, in my experience, cold water works just as well. So that'll save you energy every time you are doing your laundry. If you have a dehumidifier, there's probably a reason for it, and I'm not going to discourage you from using it. If you need it, you should definitely use it because you don't want your stuff to get moldy. I know I had a dehumidifier this year running in my garage because my stuff was just getting so dank and moldy, actually, because the outdoor humidity was so high this year. And of course, I'm such an energy geek, I had to measure it, and I figured out it cost me about 85 cents every time I dumped the bucket, and I was dumping it every single day. So that kind of hurt, but it's either that or my stuff gets moldy. So, if you have to use dehumidifier, use it, but make sure you're using it, correctly with a good setting. Dryers are pretty energy intensive, and you can dry your stuff outside using solar energy if you can put up a simple clothesline. And the last thing is to make sure you're getting Energy Star appliances. I wouldn't suggest that you go out and get rid of all your appliances and go out and buy new ones just because they have that Energy Star logo. But when your appliances do start to need to be replaced, that's when it's time to start looking for that. One of the other reasons for looking for Energy Star logo is that there's a lot of different rebates for a lot of these different appliances. It's not just, refrigerators and washers and dryers. You can even get it for air purifiers now and air conditioners and things like that. There's a little information here about the refrigerator rebate. That one actually is a little bit in flux right now because I think I heard that the company that was running that program is having some issues right now. So that might not be going on right this minute, but under normal circumstances, you can get your old one hauled away for free, which can be really helpful and save you some money. I don't know if anyone has a pool, but they also have pool pumps that are Energy Star rated and things like that. All right, well, here we are. We're going to get into the little bit more meatier stuff. Hopefully this isn't what you look like in your house, although I have done some energy audits where people are dressed similar to this in their house because it's so cold in their house, because either they can't get it to get warm, or it's so expensive to keep the house warm that they just keep it really cold. Hopefully this is just what you look like, walking around out there in the wintertime. So like I said, we heat our homes for quite a bit of the year. In a lot of years, it's a full 6 months. When I go to do an energy audit and someone says, hey, I want to save energy, I could, I suppose, just say, yeah, you know what, just like this guy and turn your thermostat down to 58 or 60, like you'll save energy, you'll save money, but that's not going to be acceptable. That's not going to go over very well, right? So there's where the rub comes in. We want to stay warm in our house, and we still want to save energy at the same time. We kind of want to have our cake and eat it too. So that's where things can get a little bit hard. A couple, again, starting with the real basic things to lower your heating bills. Turn down thermostat if you're going out for the day. If you're just going down to the store for some milk for half hour, it's really not going to do anything at all to turn down the heat. But if you're going to sleep for 6, 7, 8, 10 hours, or if you're going to work, or if you're going out for the whole day, then that definitely makes sense. You know, a lot of people will say, well, geez, when I come home and I turn it back up, the furnace or the boiler has to kick on for a whole long time to warm the house back up. So isn't it kind of a wash? Isn't it the same thing? And it really isn't, because the energy that it takes to warm up your house when you get home is actually less than the energy that would have been lost for the whole entire time that you were gone, especially if it's, 8, 10, 12 hours. So that definitely will save you some energy to do that. If you're the kind of person that forgets and you go to work, you're like, oh, shoot, I forgot to turn the heat down. It's going to be hot in my house all day for no reason. Then a really inexpensive programmable thermostat will do it for you. Or if you go to bed and you forget to turn it down, the programmable thermostat will do it for you. They have really fancy Wi-Fi enabled ones and everything too. Honestly, I'm not a huge fan of those. They just seems like they're really expensive. If you're kind of a real tech kind of person, you like that ability, then that's fine. But for the most part, the biggest part of the energy savings in a programmable thermostat, you can get that with just your regular, off the shelf, inexpensive one. You take a look at that picture of that air conditioner right there, you can tell that shouldn't be in there. And the reason you can tell is because there's snow on top of it. If there's snow on top of your air conditioner, that means you should have taken it out already. Like, it shouldn't be there. That's wasting energy too. On the other hand, if it's wintertime and all your storm windows are still in a stack in the basement or the garage, you kind of missed the boat on that. Like, those should be up. They're for a reason. So you should use those. The other thing is that you should make sure your windows are all closed and latched. The seals, the weather stripping around most windows are designed to work the best when they're actually latched and locked. So it's not just like a security thing, but it also is going to help you save some energy by making sure those are all locked.
Ed, we got a question from Tom again.
Okay.
Yeah, me again.
Go ahead.
We don't hear you, Tom.
Can't hear you, Tom. Maybe you could try typing it in. We could go that route. I know you guys out there in Cornish have some interesting connectivity and cell phone issues. It's kind of, I've been to Cornish many, many times. The company I work for, we've done a lot of work in Cornish, and I always love it when I go out there because I usually have to get out my paper map to get to where I'm going because of all the issues with road signage and no cell phone coverage and Google Maps not working. And
can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, so I've heard through Consumer Reports that 8 degrees is the ideal differential between setting your temperature and your thermostat down for a house. I'm wondering if you have any ideas on that, and I'm also wondering for a hot tub, is it the same?
I would say that sounds pretty accurate to me. It's sort of like everything. It sort of depends, right? Like there are some houses that if you turn the heat down 15 degrees when you go to sleep, when you wake up in the morning, it's not going to go down 15 degrees because the house is pretty tight. It's pretty insulated. Now, there are other houses where it might go down 20 degrees if you let it overnight, right? So it all sort of all depends on what your house is capable of doing. So you kind of have to play with it and do it on an individual basis. I would say the most you can get away with is the best, right? So if you can get away with more than 8, then that's going to save even more energy. It's basically like for every degree that you can lower it, you're going to save more energy. So 8's better than 6, but 10 is better than 8. 12 is even better, but that might not be, feasible in your house for multiple reasons. Hot tubs are an interesting one. It's a tough one. It takes a long, long time for water to warm up and cool down. So it definitely wouldn't make sense like on a daily basis to do it. I'm not even sure if it would make sense on a weekly basis. On the other hand, like I know my parents went to Florida for 8 weeks this winter, and they shut their hot tub down because 8 weeks is a long time to be heating a hot tub when no one's going to be in it. So that definitely saved them a lot of energy, and it didn't take a whole lot to heat it back up when they got back. But short-term things are sort of a different story. Good question. Some of the concepts that you kind of, sorry, went ahead too far. Some of the concepts that you need to keep in mind when we're looking at heat transfer in a house is that, heat is always going from hot to cold. It never stops. If anybody comes in and says they can stop the heat loss in your house, kick them out because they're lying or they don't know what they're talking about. It's always escaping through the walls and the floor and the ceiling. It's just a question of how fast is it escaping. So all we really try to do as energy auditors and insulators is we try to slow it down as best we can. That's the best we can do. We can never really stop it. You might remember these terms from your high school physics class: convection, conduction, and radiation. Those are three of the more major ways that heat moves. There's a few other ones that aren't really applicable to us. In fact, radiation isn't really going to be something we're going to talk about today either. If we were in like Phoenix or Tallahassee, we might be, but for us here in New Hampshire, for the most part, conduction and convection are the two things that we are dealing with when it comes to how your house is losing heat. Conduction is the real basic one that most people sort of intuitively understand. It's when heat goes through a solid surface, right? So this person here is holding looks like a metal skewer or something in a flame. They don't have a glove on. Pretty soon they're going to let go of that thing because the heat from the flame is going to move right through the solid of that whatever that thing is. It looks like a metal poker or something, right into their hand, right? If you had a brick like this and half of it was warm and half was cold, the heat's going to go from the hot part to the cold part. So that's kind of like one of the basic principles. And what we do is we try to, like I said, we try to slow that down. So we try to use things that are called insulators because they are very poor conductors, if that makes sense. So we want to slow that process down by using something that's not a good conductor. A lot of things can be used as insulation. Here's a couple pictures from houses I've been in. On the left, anyone want to take a guess at what that one might be? It's the top and the side and the angled part is wood, but in the center of the picture, there's sort of this brown, stringy looking stuff. Anyone want to take a guess at what they think that might be? This actually came from a house over in Walpole, New Hampshire. So when I did the energy audit here, I was kind of thinking maybe it was some kind of cast off from a farm or something because it's farm country. I thought maybe it was hay or rye or some kind of, farm detritus or something. And it turns out it's actually seaweed, even that far inland. I've seen this a few other times too. But yeah, there was a company back in the 20s, I think it was, called the Cabot Company, named after, I think it was Sir John Cabot, who was a famous explorer. And they actually used to dry out seaweed and then put it in bags and sell it to people. And they would put it in houses and insulate houses with it. So, it worked. Probably had some other drawbacks, but it worked. The middle is an old picture of a house that used to use this stuff called balsam wool. And on the far right, of course, that's, the standard nylon pantyhose and underwear and stuff that someone has taken and stuffed into a hole in their wall. I mean, you're desperate when you're putting your underwear in the hole in your house to try to keep the heat in. So yeah, people go to great lengths to try to, insulate their homes. And things that insulate are rated, and we rate them with what's called an R value. And the higher the R value, the more insulation value it has, right? So the higher the number, it's a better resistor to heat loss. It's not as good of a conductor. So things like fiberglass, you might have that in your house. That's about 3 per inch. Cellulose is about the same. That's another sort of light, fluffy material that gets used as an insulation. There's rigid foam boards out there that are 4, 5, or even 6 per inch. Spray foam is a pretty popular insulation material these days. That's pushing 6 or 7 per inch. That doesn't mean that that's automatically a better product than cellulose or fiberglass just because it has a higher number. That's just the rating per inch, right? So there's certain situations where one might be preferable to another. And there's also obviously price differences between these things, and there's other different variables. So And just for comparison's sake, they don't really rate windows with R value. They have a different sort of rating system, but if they did, a brand new window would only be about R3, maybe R5, a really good, triple pane window, maybe with argon in it would be only about R5. So not very good. Wood is easy to remember. It's about 1 for every inch. It varies a little bit on what kind of wood it is, but generally speaking, wood is about R1 per inch. So if you had like a log cabin with 16-inch logs, it would be R16, at least where it's 16 inches thick, but at the top where it kind of curves in, it's only 3 or 4 inches thick. Well, then you'd only be looking at, R3 or 4 for that part of it. So concrete is also, not very good at resisting heat. So that's only about 1. It doesn't matter if it's a 2-inch thick piece of concrete or it's 12 inches. It really is very, very poor. The other interesting thing about this R value system that we have is that just because it says it on the package doesn't mean that's actually what it's doing in real life. It really depends on the install quality. And in New Hampshire here, the install quality can be pretty lousy, even in a lot of newer homes, because you don't need to be a licensed contractor to build a house in New Hampshire. You don't have to have any kind of training or licensing to do any kind of insulation in New Hampshire. And sometimes don't even have building inspectors. So you could spend $2 million on a house in New Hampshire and it might not meet the insulation code. It might not even meet the plumbing code, the electrical code either, because it might not have ever been inspected by anybody. So, it makes looking at homes in New Hampshire very, very interesting. Sometimes the things you see, and people try to do their own stuff sometimes too. And sometimes they do a really good job. Sometimes they do it really, really poorly. So install quality is very important.
Yeah,
it's funny.
Charles Clark.
Go ahead, Charles.
Where does rock wool stand on this table of insulation?
Rock wool is about the same. That's about 3 or 4 per inch too. And that's one of the best things about that is that it's really impervious to fire. It's very good for discouraging mold growth and things like that. So that can be really helpful in there. Good question. It's funny, like if I was going to be a hair cutter in New Hampshire, I'd actually have to get a license from the state of New Hampshire to do that. But I can do energy audits and insulate till the cows come home, and there's no oversight at all. So it's interesting.
Yeah, I point out, even if you have a house built by a contractor, all the codes are minimal.
Yeah, well, the code itself is the minimum, right? The code itself is the bare minimum. And if you're lucky, you'll get that. If you pay extra, you might get more than the building code, but you're not going to get anything more than the building code, unless you pay extra. And like I said, you might not even get that. Good point.
Yeah, thank you.
Speaking of energy codes, right? So here is the energy code for New Hampshire, which is, if you look at the website, it says this is the energy code that we follow in New Hampshire. But again, not every town is doing this. Not every town is enforcing this because some towns can't because they don't even have a building inspector. So those are some pretty big numbers there, right? We're approaching R50 for the attic, 20 for the walls. You can look at the sort of average numbers on the right here. I'm in attics sometimes that have nothing, no insulation, and walls that have no insulation, and basements that have no insulation. In fact, the only insulation in the house are like, the sweatshirts and the coats that are people wearing in the wintertime. Their houses don't have anything still. So we have a long ways to go to sort of get, the average house up to closer where it should be. I got a kick out of this. I found this in a magazine the other day. It's back, I think it was from like the late 50s, should you insulate? Well, just put a tape measure in there. If you have 6 inches, you're probably fine. That's very, very outdated, right? That would be a very uninsulated house. And it doesn't even talk about what kind of insulation this is either. Of course, this is before some of these other insulation types were even invented. So I don't know. I got a kick out of that said, because 6 inches, would definitely not be enough today.
Ted, another question from Charles.
Okay.
I work with Habitat. We just finished our house and we put R80 in the attic.
Nice.
Wondering where is the point that the insulation no longer is efficient? Is the point of return?
Yeah, it's a good question. It sort of depends, I suppose, on what kind of insulation you're using and how expensive it is and who's doing it. Like in a Habitat home where the labor is being provided for free by volunteers, then, and if you're blowing cellulose, cellulose is actually very, very inexpensive. So yeah, I think 80 is a great. I have 80 in my attic. That's just because I get the stuff for free when it's left over from a job and I put it up in my attic, you know, but if I had to pay for that, I probably wouldn't. And it's not like a linear savings or payback on that. So in other words, going from like R0 to R10 has a much bigger savings than going from like R40 to 50, even though it's the same 10 points. So as you get up on the R value, each additional, couple inches of insulation isn't going to help as much. So that's kind of why the building code says R50. The newer building code that we're not following yet says R60. And I believe that New Hampshire they're trying to push it back to 50. But yeah, I would say, if you're up there anyway, you might as well go a little bit extra and get it up to R80 if you can, because we have no idea what oil and propane is going to do in the future, right? Or wood for that matter, right? So in terms of cost, I mean, the people, like I said, back in 1960, they thought 6 inches was enough. Like that was the code, that was the minimum, that was plenty. And you could argue the same thing now, that maybe the codes we're using now will someday be, a lot less than what we, should have.
This house was very well insulated, double wall construction, R49 in the walls, R30 below the slab, R80 attic.
Great. Yeah, I did some work for some habitat houses over in Plymouth when I used to live up that way. It was a very interesting process. Did they do like a blow door test or anything on that house? Did they concentrate on?
They did a blow door test. It exceeded the requirements.
Yeah, I'm good.
And when we did when we built the house, there was no partitions between the walls. We did this complete ceiling first.
Yeah.
And then we put our walls up. So the ceiling is one complete sheet.
Yeah, that's an interesting way of doing it. That's cool.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, so here's a little like a schematic diagram of a typical attic that has a whole bunch of insulation. It's like 95% insulated. There's just a few spots that are missing. The dark spots show sort of gaps or places where they kind of just got lazy and didn't really finish it, or they didn't think it was that important to get it all. They're like, oh, 95%, that's pretty good. Like that's an A in school, right? But when you actually average out the R values, it's way less than the R38 that you put it in there. It actually drops it down to like less than R15 as an average. And that's just because the heat loss through those dark areas is going to be so rapid and so fast that it's just kind of, it's going to negate or take away from the protection that you're getting from all that other white area that actually has, R38 insulation. So, things like attic hatches. Sometimes people are like, oh, it doesn't matter if it's insulated. It's only, 2 feet by 2 feet. Well, that actually could be a significant, have a significant effect on the R value of your whole entire attic. So even if your attic is R80, like you just said, if you have a 3x3 hatch that has nothing, then you're kind of working against yourself there. A couple different ways that insulation can be, done poorly. One is just plain old insufficient, right? Not enough. So this picture here shows that, well, there's some places there you can see bare sheetrock. So obviously no insulation is not enough. The insulation that's there, I mean, it looks like those are probably 2x8s, and you can see them sticking up a couple inches. So there's only a couple inches there. So that's definitely not enough. It could be incomplete. So in the middle picture, the part that's real thick might actually be R50, or that might meet the building code, but it's got a whole strip down the middle where it's missing that layer, and you can actually see the joist sticking up. So that's really not going to function as well as the person thinks it is. And then sometimes there's just actually spots that are missing. This picture on the right shows a house that was almost a brand new house. And that whole section in red there actually faces the indoors in the living room on the other side. But when they built this house, somebody goofed and didn't realize that that part was actually, a wall that needed to be insulated. All right, and this is the part where I usually ask people to raise their hand. Does heat rise or fall? And we embarrass some people because a lot of people raise their hand and say, yeah, heat rises. And then I have to tell them, no, it doesn't. You're wrong. It's a little bit of a trick question because in a way it sort of looks like heat rises sometimes, but it really isn't. I know you've heard that, time and time again, but it's not the heat that's rising. What you're seeing is hot air that's rising, or hot water can rise too, if we're talking about a liquid. We already talked about where heat goes, like what direction it goes, and it goes towards the cold. It doesn't matter whether that cold is north, south, up, down, left, right, diagonal. The heat's always gonna go towards the cold thing. So it's a little bit of a trick question, but like I said, hot air will rise just like in a hot air balloon. That's why hot air balloons work, right? And that's why it sometimes appears as if heat is rising, but it really isn't. It's the hot air that's rising that makes you think that it's the heat that's rising. So if you look at your house, similar to a hot air balloon, it's really important that the top of the hot air balloon doesn't have any holes in it. There's a hole in the bottom because that's where you insert the hot air, so it rises up and it will give it some buoyancy. But a house is the same way. Warm air is more buoyant, so it rises up just like it does in the hot air balloon. And in houses, it never really just stops at the ceiling. It just escapes out through all the little gaps and cracks and holes. Every time that warm air escapes out of your house, it's got to get replaced by cold air coming in down low. Otherwise, you would run out of air eventually. You'd say, geez, I'm getting kind of lightheaded. I can't breathe. There's no air. It all escaped out. So that's why you have two different color arrows there, right? You have the blue arrow to signify the cold air coming in for free. And then you got the expensive air that you've already paid to heat it up. You want it to stick around, but a lot of that is leaking out through the top. So that's what we're kind of fighting against. We call it the stack effect. You can even have this like in a room. Like if any of you guys have a wood stove in this situation, if you have a wood stove, it'll heat up the air in the room. And when that hot air gets over toward the window, it'll cool off because there's a window there. And I told you windows are only R3, 4, 5 at the most. So that air is going to cool off and then it'll come over to the wood stove, heat up again. And you can actually get like a convective loop like that in the room. Same thing can happen in an empty exterior wall. So if you have an empty wall, the air that's closest to the sheetrock is going to get warm and it's going to go up and then it's going to hit the outside wall and cool and come down. And you can actually have like a loop inside your house, inside your walls, excuse me. So knowing all that, it makes sense that the ABC stand for attic, basement, center. So the big place to focus is the attic or the top. If you don't have an attic, some houses don't have an attic, but you still have a top. We'll just call it an attic for clarity's sake here. The other place is the basement and the center, which is where everyone lives, right? Most people don't live in the attic or the basement, but those are the two most important parts from a building science point of view. And the center really is not. So how do you find these? You go up to your attic, and a lot of times what I do is I look for stained fiberglass. Whether it's pink or yellow or white, oftentimes in certain places it's not. And you can see, like, take this picture where the electrician ran a wire down through the hole there. They never seal up their holes. Now air's been coming out of that hole for whatever. This house is probably 25 years old. So for 25 years, for 6 months a year, a little bit of warm air has been coming out of that hole. The air has pollen in it, it has dust, it has all sorts of things in it. So the fiberglass sort of ends up becoming like a filter, and it filters out all that stuff. So it's not mold or anything. In most cases, it's really just dust and things like that. But that'll actually help you sort of show you where the leaks are. That wire there is going down to like a light switch or something, but it's not just that one. It's not just air getting in around that one light switch and coming out, because every wall has a wire that goes across it too, to go from electrical socket to electrical socket. So each each bay of every wall in your house, even the interior walls, are open to each other. And then usually the one at the end where the light switch is, that has a hole at the top going in your attic. So it's really kind of a conduit for a lot of the air in your house to get out up into your attic. You can see the same thing happening over here with the picture of the fan or the light there. Chimney chases like this are really famous for being really big air leaks. We'll talk a little bit more about how to fix that, because by fire code there should be a gap there. There's supposed to be a gap there. You're not supposed to have anything flammable against that chimney. But there are some. That one's probably big enough. I could certainly drop my phone down in there and it might go all the way to the basement, but there's some you could drop a water bottle down into the basement. There's some that you could take a basketball and you could drop it down there. They're so big. Even the tops of walls will leak. Here's the top of an interior wall. That 2x4 that you see is the top plate for a wall. And you can see that there's like a dark stripe of dust and stuff in the fiberglass above the top plate, because no 2x4 is exactly 3.5 inches, and they're all twisted and over time and the drywallers come in, there's always a little bit of a crack there. So those are all sort of, typical things that are leaking this hot air from your house. If you have a really old house, it's balloon framed, you might have an actual open wall top like this. That's, sometimes they're a full 4 inches wide and you can see a wire going down there. So obviously that wall is going to leak into the attic without a top plate. So now that you guys know a little bit more about that, you can probably tell me what you think of this attic hatch. It's made out of pegboard. Pegboard is the stuff you use in your garage, and you put hooks in it, and then you can move your shovels and your rakes around. Not a very good idea for an attic hatch, right? Knowing that what we just talked about, that how you're trying to keep the warm air in your house, right? The pegboard is just going to let air through each hole. Even if you put 16 inches of fiberglass above this, which is plenty, that's still not going to work because it's leaky. So it's not just, having enough insulation. The air sealing is super, super important, or getting that sealed up. I learned really early on when I was doing energy audits not to look at something like this and say like, oh my gosh, who's the idiot who did this? Because that's when the homeowner said, oh yeah, I built that, So I learned early on to look at something like that and be like, oh, that's an interesting hatch. What's the story with that? And then the homeowner says, oh, that was here when I moved in 10 years ago. And then I can, trash it a little bit, but, because people have, this is not stuff that most people know about. So another really good reason to think about keeping the warm air in your house where it belongs and not letting it get up in your attic is not just because it saves on your energy bill, but because that air, even if it doesn't seem like it has a lot of moisture in it, let's say it's wintertime and your air in your house is say 40 or 50% relative humidity. That doesn't feel too humid. That feels comfortable. But if that air gets up into your attic and it cools off, it can't maintain that relative humidity. It has to go up. They're sort of like inversely related, right? So as the temperature goes down, the relative humidity goes up. So if you have air escaping into your attic, you can have an attic that looks something like this. And that's not from any kind of outdoor water. That's actually just moisture from the house getting in the attic. If I see something like that, I technically can't say it's mold because I'm not like a mold expert. On the right, I could tell that person that was frost because I don't have to take a class or get a certificate to know what frost is. If I touch it and it's cold and it melts in my fingers, like, yeah, that's frost. And that will definitely lead to some kind of microbial growth. And I would refer that person to, like a mold remediation company to kind of come in and take a look at that and maybe fix it if it's really bad. But the solution is to, get the mold remediated, but then also fix all the places where the warm air is getting into the attic, because that's what's causing this. So moving down from the attic, down to the basement, if you have, some houses don't even have a door like that going to their bulkhead. But if you have a door, if you can see light coming around it, that's a sign that maybe air is coming in. Windows can be really leaky. Any place where there's like an electrical or pipe penetration coming in, those are all things that can, let in all that cold air. The rim joist is the area that's sort of between the foundation and the first floor. It may have been tight when the house was built, but over time, the wood shrinks and it twists and it dries out. So there's a lot of air that can get pulled in down low around that area. The center of the house, we're not going to talk about too much because, like I said, it's not the priority. From a comfort point of view, there may be some things you can do there, but from a whole house energy use point of view, there's really not a whole lot you can do. There's a few things you can pick on. So your doors, if you have a fireplace, flue pipes, things like that. But I wouldn't even bother doing anything with any of these things until you've done the attic and the basement first. Occasionally, you'll have some issues in the center of the house that you can deal with. On the left here is an interesting picture of a condo project in Dover that we did. And that part where you can see the fiberglass there, that was covered with just vinyl siding. That's all that was up there. So whoever built this house decided, okay, well, the walls, yeah, we know we have to sheathe that with wood, but this is not a wall, so I guess we can save $100 and not actually sheathe it. So they just put vinyl siding over it. So you can see how stained that fiberglass is. I could actually reach into that fiberglass and then like knock on the sheetrock in their hallway in their house before I even got in the house. And this other picture is one of these sort of McMansions over in Bedford, New Hampshire, that they were, pumping out for years and years, and they cut corners like crazy. And they always cut corners in places that people don't see. So this is actually up. I pulled out a recessed light on the back porch and stuck my camera up and looked, and they didn't even finish sheathing the house. So air can easily get into this cavity and then easily get into that wall cavity and then easily get in through the electric sockets and the light switches and everything else. So you really just never know what you're going to find, even if it's a new expensive house. Most people may have heard the term, like houses need to breathe. Was kind of a saying in the building industry for many, many years. And it's really not true. People need to breathe. That's true. But houses don't need to. Houses need to have fresh air, and people need to have fresh air. But the reality is most people's houses in New Hampshire are way leakier than they could be. You can tighten them up and save on the energy bills. You can plug up a lot of holes and still have plenty of fresh air in your house. If you get nosebleeds in your house in the winter, or some people actually run a humidifier in the winter because their house is so dry, that's a sign that your house is probably super, super leaky, because the outdoor air in the winter, tends to be really, really dry. These days we kind of go by a different, sort of motto, and that's, seal tight and ventilate right. And that means, get the house as tight as you can possibly make it. And then instead of just kind of relying on gaps and cracks and holes that happen to be there in different places to let air in and out uncontrollably, instead you can put in either an HRV or a bath fan like this, and that will actually take outdoor fresh air and distribute it into your house, and it'll take stale air and it'll get it rid of your and send it out of your house. Rather than just like doing it willy-nilly with no controls or whatsoever. So this is going to be, more and more is the standard in most people's new homes. Bath fans, it's amazing how many people either A, don't have them at all, which is not good, or they have them and they're just dumping into the attic, and that's not good either for reasons we just talked about. It should always be done with like really good metal pipe, not this cheap white flimsy stuff, which I think they should just outlaw that stuff, honestly. It's not good for much of anything. It deteriorates, it falls apart. There's a picture there. You can actually see there's a big chunk of ice inside that one. It ripped open and there's ice inside there. So bath fans are really important to make sure you get right. The other thing I should say about them is that you really generally don't want to put them, you don't want to have 3 or 4 of them going together and then going outside. They should be sort of individually vented to the outdoors. And then again, it's really important to take a step back and assess your house for, where is any potential moisture or other indoor air quality problem coming from? Like, am I storing gasoline in my basement for my snowblower? Well, it's probably not the best place for it. Do I have standing water in my basement like this? This picture is actually horrible because, underneath the plastic on the ceiling, you can see there's water up there too. So yeah, and old houses can be really, really tricky, but you got to spend some time thinking about, where are these potential sources of moisture and what can we do about them? And sometimes there's easy solutions. Sometimes it's just a matter of like, putting some gutters on your house, maybe doing some drainage on the outside, things like that. Sometimes it's a little bit more, a little bit more involved. Obviously I'm not going to tell you to get rid of your pets, get rid of your plants, stop cooking. We have to live our lives. We want to have plants and pets and things, and we have to keep breathing, and even breathing will produce moisture. So there's always going to be some sort of background of moisture in your house. It's just the excess moisture that you have to be thinking about. So hopefully this isn't anyone's house here that's on the Zoom call today. That did actually happen a few years ago. I had a photograph in my slide presentation in Portsmouth, and the lady in the back stood up. She's like, "Hey, that's my house." I was a little bit embarrassed, but I took it from the street. So I think this house is actually in Vermont. But now that we've talked about stuff for a while, you can probably guess what's going on in this house, right? There's a really bad ice dam problem. Those are really dangerous. The snow, you can tell, is just melting off the roof really quickly, which means there's heat loss of some sort. So it could be one of two things or both things. It could be that the house doesn't have enough insulation in the attic. It could have either none or 2 inches or 6 inches or maybe even 10, but it doesn't have, the full insulation value. But it's also like, it could be also that this house it could have 18 inches of insulation in the attic, but it could have a bath fan dumping into the attic. It could have open wall tops. It could have two huge chimney chases there that are just letting air up into the attic. And as we saw with those pictures, like fluffy insulation isn't going to stop the airflow. It'll slow it down, but it's not going to stop it. So that's probably what's going on in this house. I mean, there's probably, let's see, there's two chimneys. One has snow on the top. The other one doesn't. So I'm guessing one is probably an active chimney for either a wood stove or a boiler or something. So, that big brick wall in the attic is going to be giving off some heat. There's not a whole lot you can do about that. The other one looks like it's got snow on it, so it's probably not a functioning chimney anymore. So the only way to know for sure would be to get in there and take a look. Ventilation is a big part of this too. A properly vented attic has a less likely chance of developing a problem like this, but it's not a silver bullet. I've been in plenty of homes that have sort of textbook attic ventilation, yet they still have issues like this going on. And sometimes, this can get really bad. If the water backs up behind that big ice dam, it can actually go up under the shingles and start to come into your house and drip into your house. And that can cause lots of damage. And obviously, if these things fall, they can cause lots of damage too. So now that you are able to sort of diagnose that a little bit on your own, I think you could probably also tell me why this is not a safe, easy way to get rid of ice dams. This is actually taken at a hardware store only about 20 or 30 minutes from where you guys are. I won't say what the name of the hardware store because I don't want to embarrass them, and technically, I guess this isn't really false advertising because it is true. Like if you get up there and put this stuff on your roof, it will get rid of the ice dam. I'm not going to lie. The problem is when it snows again, you're going to have another ice dam because this is just a one-time solution. It's also not really safe and easy to, get a 50-pound sack of salt and put it on your shoulder and go up your ladder with your down parka and your gloves and then try to sprinkle that stuff on there. And people have come up with all sorts of inventive ways of, putting it into socks and then tying the socks and then trying to throw the socks up on the roof and do it that way. I mean, people are pretty desperate to get rid of these things because they can be really bad. But as we talked about, the real good way of getting rid of your ice dam is to start thinking about your insulation and start thinking about your air sealing. So again, going back to those ABCs, that's where you start in the attic and you start with the air sealing. It's a lot easier to do the air sealing first. You can see this sort of the before and after picture here. You can imagine how hard it would be to go into that attic, with 15 inches of blown cellulose and try to find the lights or the wall tops. Or the electrical penetrations. A lot easier to do when there's less stuff up there. So do the air sealing first and then think about the insulation. Here's a couple pictures of sort of what air sealing could look like. On the left is a chimney chase. That's a professional treatment there. You could probably do that on your own if you're really handy. But that white stuff is actually metal. It's like coil stock sheet metal. And the red stuff is fire caulk because you can't just go to the hardware store and get some foam and foam that up. The lights in the middle here, those are called can covers, those little bucket looking things like that. Yeah, you can just use foam around those. That's no big deal. That'll work really well. But, chimney chases have to be done a certain way. This picture on the right is an interesting one. That was a house that had the insulation in the attic was so deteriorated from actually, I think it was bats and rats they had up there that they just had it all removed. So it was just a blank slate, perfectly empty attic. But it had tons and tons and tons of penetrations and holes. So rather than try to find and seal each tiny little hole, they decided to have the whole thing spray foamed with just an inch or two of spray foam because the stuff's really expensive. So you don't want to use it if you don't have to. But 2 inches of spray foam will seal that whole entire attic plane. And then the contractor can come in and add 12 or 14 inches of cellulose on top of that. And that's why you can see in the background there, there's like a wooden barrier around the chimney there. That's because there's going to be insulation there, and you don't want that to be touching that chimney. Couple more pictures of, again, these are professional installations, but, depending on how good you are, you might be able to pull something like this off yourself. Drop down stairs to attics are almost never sealed up and covered. So this drop down stair on the left has got a 6-inch plug of rigid foam board, and you can see it's really, really fully weather stripped. It's actually more important that hatch is weather stripped well than it is the front door, because that's going to leak more air than your front door is, because it's up high in the building. So really important that those get done right. If you have to store stuff in your attic, we try to discourage that if we can, but every house is different. Every homeowner is different in terms of their needs. But if you have an attic that you absolutely need to store stuff in, there are ways of building like a raised platform so you can store stuff and you can insulate underneath it, or you can build like a wall and have it's fully insulated behind the wall, and in front of it, maybe not so much. But these are just sort of some examples so you can kind of get a picture in your head of what that might look like. Slopes, like in Cape style houses, can be kind of tricky. On the left, this is a house where I think it was a Cape, and they were going to move, make that into living space up there. So they had all those slopes spray foamed. And you can see it's been shaved back in the middle so that can be drywalled. And then here's another little knee wall space that has been done with like a rigid foam board. It's called Thermax. It has a foil face on it. And that can be a really good solution too. Knee wall spaces can be kind of tricky, but there definitely are, ways of doing them. This is actually this actually might have been a house out in Cornish now that I think about it. This is a before and after of a house. You can see there's no door going to that bulkhead. You can see the light coming in around the bulkhead. Which doesn't mean it's a bad bulkhead door. I mean, bulkhead doors are designed to keep water out and burglars and raccoons. But they're not designed to keep air out. They're not airtight, right? So, and that's fine, but there needs to be a door at the bottom of the stairs to be airtight. So this is just a custom made plywood door. It's fully insulated. It's got really good weather stripping around it. Much cheaper than, going out and buying a commercial door. Plus, getting a commercial door that would fit in that space is probably next to impossible. So, in a lot of buildings, you have to kind of work with what you have and figure out ways of making it work. Walls in basements, that's usually the place to get that protection on the bottom of the house. In most houses, you really don't want to insulate the ceiling of your basement, because in most cases, you would be putting your pipes and your ducts and your boiler and maybe your dryer and everything on the outside of the insulation. So they're not going to be very happy with that. So insulating the walls is usually the best way to go. And it can be kind of expensive, but you got to think about it. You're protecting your whole entire house from the outdoors on the bottom by doing the walls. You're not doing it for like the cans of paint and the stuff you have stored in your basement. Like that stuff doesn't care whether it's 40, 50 or 70 in the basement. You're not doing it for the stuff in the basement. You're doing it because when you're standing in your kitchen, in a lot of houses, the only thing between you and the outdoors is like a little bit of tile, some wood, and then some concrete on the wall in the basement. And that, that's really not enough. So each house is kind of done differently. Basements, can get kind of tricky. So that's, oftentimes where you might want to start getting some professional help. Again, we talked about the center. I'm not going to, spend much time on that. Weather stripping, things like that. They have some chimney balloons and flue blockers and things you can use, but not really worth putting any time or energy or money into this until you've done the others. Now, if your walls going from the A to the B to the C, so if the walls in your house are empty, that is definitely, something that should be done. It should be done after the attic and the basement, but it should be done. And that's really not something that you can do yourself. It's a really difficult job. And the machinery that like the cellulose machine that you might get like at a hardware store, that's for blowing loose cellulose. It's not for dense packing, which is what this fellow here is doing. It's kind of a different technique. It requires a different machine, and it requires more cellulose than it would be if you were just kind of blowing it light and fluffy. So that's definitely something where you would probably want to get some professional help to do that. If you have a forced hot air system, then chances are you have ducts that are running in unconditioned spaces like your basement or knee wall space or your attic. They're probably not insulated and they're probably not sealed either. You don't want to use duct tape. Strangely enough, duct tape is marketed for some reason. It says duct tape, but it really does not work very well on sealing ducts. It lasts for a few months and then it falls off. So the best thing to use is called mastic. It's this really gooey stuff. You know, you put some gloves on, you go up and you seal up all the cracks. And you can also use, like, there's a foil tape out there that can work pretty well too. In New Hampshire, every new house is supposed to have all their ducts sealed during construction. Again, not every house and not every town is doing that. Not every builder is doing that. Not every HVAC person is doing that. But they are supposed to be not only sealed but also tested. Again, we talked about windows. You know, hopefully there's no window salesman on the call today that I'm going to get anger, but it's almost never cost effective to replace windows if all you're trying to do is save on your energy bill. If you have a window that has lost the seal and it's all frosted up and fogged, you can't see out of it, or it's cracked, or it won't open or shut, well, that's a good reason to replace a window. But to replace a window just for energy efficiency is usually not cost effective at all. There's other things you can do to make that window better. You can put cellular shades in. You can put thermal curtains in. This fellow here is putting in interior storms. Those can be really helpful too. And they're a fraction of the cost of replacing a window. I used to live in a house that actually had like triple paned argon filled windows, and it sitting in front of that window still feels cold. It's just the limitations of the technology these days. It's always kind of be the worst part of your house. So to spend thousands, if not tens of thousands of dollars just to improve a small portion of your house and only have it be a little better than it was before, and then still have it be the worst part of your house, that math doesn't really add up. So this might be how you're feeling at this time, because I know I've covered a lot of ground. So we'll talk a little bit about getting some professional help. If you want someone to look at your house and look at the whole thing as a whole system and do a comprehensive evaluation, that would be what we call an energy audit. They're going to come in and they're going to look at your combustion equipment, like your hot water heater, your furnace, your boiler, make sure that's efficient, make sure it's safe. And coming out of that, you would get a list of findings and a list of the improvements that are recommended to be done. Energy auditors aren't going to just come in and look at like your attic and then leave, or your basement or your crawl space like I'm doing in this picture here. You're always going to look at the whole entire house because everything is connected together. It's interesting that, like I said, in New Hampshire, I would have to get a license to cut hair, but to do energy audits, anybody can do it. So it's really important that as a customer that you do some background and do some homework. You want to look for someone who's certified. The Building Performance Association or Institute is one of the leading national organizations that sort of trains and certifies energy auditors. So I would look for someone who's got that or something like that. There are other ones out there. If you're looking for a list of people who do this kind of thing, you can go to organization called REPA. It's the Residential Energy Performance Association. You can also contact New Hampshire Saves, because they have a list of qualified people that they can send you to also. If you do get an energy audit, chances are you'll probably get a blower door test. This is a big fan that goes in the doorway. It's a really neat tool. Technically speaking, every new house in New Hampshire is supposed to get this test done before they get a CO and the people move into the house. It's not happening in every town. Some towns are enforcing it. Some towns aren't. Again, some towns can't because they don't even have a building inspector. So it's a really neat tool. There's some cases where you can't run this test if you have like asbestos pipe wrap in the basement or vermiculite or something like that. But generally speaking, we can run these tests. And what it does is it kind of sucks all the air out of the house, and you close all the windows and everything. And then you can actually measure how much air is going through this fan. And that tells you how leaky the house is. So you can kind of actually quantify the air leakage and say, well, it's costing this much to have it be this number. And if we lowered it by this much, this is how much it would save. You can also use it to find air leaks. A again, oftentimes I'm going up into an attic. If I see all that stained fiberglass, well, I kind of already know that those are leaky. But the blower door sometimes can be really helpful for finding leaks that you might not find otherwise, just because it makes things a little bit more evident. You can also use this to make sure that your house is not so tight that you have to start doing some of that mechanical ventilation that we talked about. Again, in an existing house, it's pretty tough to get it down to that point. Even in a new house, it's hard to get it down to that point. You really have to pay attention to details. So blower door test is a really neat tool. Oftentimes this is done in conjunction with an infrared camera. Infrared cameras are actually not that special. People think they like see through walls and stuff. They don't do any of that stuff that they do in Hollywood in the movies. All it really does is show you the surface temperature of what you're looking at. You know, how hot is it? How cold is it? That's really all it does. And then it's up to the person looking at the image to try to figure out, well, why is that spot cold and that spot warm? So in this top right picture, you can see this homeowner had this, cute little home sign on it. Well, the HO is a dark purple, and then there's some yellow in there, and then there's some parts that are like not quite dark purple, but they're not quite yellow. They're sort of in between. Well, that's not the way it should look. It should all be one color. If it's different colors, then there's something going on there. So this is a really neat tool. You can do it without a blower door test if you have, like, say 5, 10, 15 degree difference between the indoors and the outdoors. Even this morning I was doing infrared imaging at a house, and it was 60 degrees today, but in the morning it was cold last night. So there's still enough temperature differential in the morning to get some really good infrared images. With the blower door, it works a little bit better. And you could do it in the winter. You could do it in the summer. You would kind of get opposite pictures, right? So the bottom picture there is interesting because that's actually in the summertime. And the yellow is hot air coming in along a beam on the ceiling in this house. So when I ran the blower door, I was pulling in 80 degree air from the outdoors, and it was only 65 or 70 in the house. So it showed up. Now, if I was there in January, it would look the opposite. It would be yellow, and then there would be purple fingers kind of coming in of cold air. So really neat tools. Like I said, an energy auditor is also going to test your combustion equipment because you may have heard of carbon monoxide. It is you can't smell it, taste it, see it, hear it, or anything like that, but it can kill you and it can make you really sick. And everything that burns makes carbon monoxide. Sometimes people think that, like, I don't know, I've heard people say, oh, natural gas doesn't make carbon monoxide, or wood doesn't make only oil. No, oil, propane, natural gas, cow dung. It doesn't matter what it is you're burning. If you're burning something, carbon monoxide is one of the byproducts. How much of it is carbon monoxide can vary, but if you have equipment that isn't working correctly for one reason or another, it can actually make carbon monoxide that can kill you, and it can make carbon monoxide at low levels can actually make you really sick. There's been a lot of cases where people are sick and they don't know why, and they find out that they have low level carbon monoxide in their house. So really important that you have a CO detector in your house. At a bare minimum, you should have one in every house. Recommendation really would be one for every floor, especially floors that have any kind of combustion appliance. So that would be, boiler, furnace, wood stove, anything like that. Even a gas range on that floor, there should be carbon monoxide detector. Yeah, this picture here just shows like a really old water heater that is obviously showing some signs of spillage, which means carbon monoxide is coming back out into the house. The other thing that's important to realize is that your heating system and your water heater and stuff, it might be working fine right now, but if you come in and do a lot of this work, you're going to change the kind of the physics of your house. You're going to change that stack effect. You're going to change how much air is coming in and out. So in theory, you could change the way some of this equipment's working. So that's one of the benefits of getting professional help. It's amazing to me how many people have boilers and furnaces and are like, oh, it's working fine. As long as it's working fine, yeah, we're not going to pay someone to come look at it. That's really not a very good path to take. It should be inspected every year. It should be cleaned every year, serviced and tuned. The filters need to be changed, things like that. So it's not the kind of thing you want to ignore just because you think it's working okay. Talking about upgrading your heating system, you don't want to do that until you've done a whole bunch of insulating and a whole bunch of air sealing. Otherwise, it's sort of like this bucket example, right? You're putting water into a bucket that's got holes in it. The first thing you want to do is sort of fix the holes in the bucket and then think about, how you're going to put water in that bucket. This is an interesting case. When I was in Portsmouth, I ran the blower door and we heard a big bang upstairs, and the homeowner said, "Oh, what was that big bang?" And I said, "Oh, it's probably just your cat or your dog. They didn't like it, the noise or something." She said, "No, I don't have a cat. It's something else." And I said, "Well, maybe it's just a door, because it'll actually the blower door. It's not like the blower door stirs up dust in your house, but it'll actually open and shut doors if there's enough air coming through." Anyway, we went upstairs and looked, and all the doors were open. We went in the bathroom, and this is the sink. This is the mirror that was over her sink in the bathroom. I pulled it right off the wall from the suction from the blower door, and that's because she told me then this was like a house from 1955. She just bought it. It was a flipped house. And I said, "Geez, I know what happened. There was a really ugly medicine cabinet here, and they chucked it in a dumpster. And then they decided, like, well, what's the easiest, cheapest thing to do? Oh, we'll just, go to Home Depot, get a little $10 mirror. We'll put a nail over there. We'll just cover the hole with a mirror." So a lot of the air in her house was escaping around this mirror, getting into that attic, unbeknownst to her, until I actually came in with the blower door and we reversed the flow of air. We pulled the mirror right off the wall. That's pretty rare that something like that happens, but. All right, let's talk about New Hampshire Saves now. There's a whole host and a whole slew of programs and offerings that they have. I'm going to fly through some of them really quick to focus on the one for existing homes. But they do have some incentives for upgrading your heating systems. You can get a more efficient gas boiler or furnace. You can get a cold climate heat pump. These are not the heat pumps that were put in the 80s and the 90s. Those really weren't up to par in terms of working in a cold place like New Hampshire. The new ones are much, much better. Even during that really big cold spell we had 2 years ago when it was like -20, most people that had heat pumps did really well. You can even get some incentives for wood biomass stoves, like pellet stoves and wood stoves. And then, of course, there's some thermostats and things. You can go to the New Hampshire Saves website and they'll talk about that. There's also now, starting this year, some separate incentives for this kind of thing. The IRA Act has a bunch of federal tax credits for this type of thing too. So that would be, above and beyond, in addition to any kind of rebate you might get from New Hampshire Saves. We talked a little bit about the heat pumps. By the time my kids are buying a house, these I think will become standard in every home out there. And the old octopus furnace in the basement is going to be kind of a thing of the past, like a dinosaur. These are super, super efficient, way more efficient than anything else out there. And they work, like I said, in really cold weather. And there's some really good rebates for them. They run off electricity, so your electric bill is definitely going to go up, like somebody asked early on. But your other heating bills are going to go down. And again, if you have solar, or New Hampshire started moving towards a system where you could actually, if you live in the woods or you don't have a really good roof for solar, New Hampshire may be able to eventually get to the point where other states are, where you can like buy into a solar farm in another place and have that credited towards your electric account. So that's something else that's coming to New Hampshire. I'm not going to get into specifics really about these unless people want, but yeah, they're super efficient because they're technically not making heat, right? Like a boiler or a furnace is actually literally making heat. It's burning something like propane or oil or wood. A heat pump isn't making any heat at all. It's just moving heat from the outdoors to the indoors. So even when it's 10 degrees outside, from a physics point of view, there's still energy out there that if you have a refrigerant cycle and a coolant and a microprocessor in there, you can actually extract heat energy from that air. Here's just some examples of some of the rebates through New Hampshire Saves. The heat pump rebates are sort of based on like how many tons the system is. So the bigger the system, the more rebate you get. They also have heat pump water heaters, and you can get a $750 rebate for them. New homes, there's this thing called Drive to Net Zero. The unfortunate thing about that is that it's the builder that gets the incentive, not the homeowner. So, if you're going to go for that when you're building a new home, you got to make sure you work out a deal with your builder so that some of that comes to you instead of just to the builder. But what I want to focus on is the New Hampshire Saves Home Energy Performance Program. That is the one that they have for existing homes. The way you get into the program is you have to go online and you have to, we'll show you the slide in a second here, what it looks like, but you type in some stuff. It tells you whether you get into the program or not. If you get in, then you get an energy audit for $100, which is actually a really good deal. That's energy audits are oftentimes $300, $400, $500. But beyond that, they actually will pay for 75% of the cost of air sealing your house and adding insulation in different places. So it's a really good program. You can get a rebate up to $6,000. Some of the utilities also have like a financing program. Eversource actually has an on-bill financing program. So I had a customer just last week who I think their project was $8,000. Eversource is going to pay $6,000. The homeowner still has to pay $2,000, but Eversource is actually going to pay their $2,000 also, kind of forward them the money, and then they put it on their electric bill for 2 years at 0%. So they give you the money for free, basically. It's like a no interest loan. So there's some really good programs out there. So to get to this program, you go to New Hampshire Saves, and you go to it might take a couple clicks to get to here because their website is a little clunky, but you get to this site here where it says test your home, right? And when you get to there, you have to put in a couple things. You got to put in who your utility is, what your zip code is, how many heated square footage you have in your house. Now that may or may not be what your property tax card says. You have to be careful because some property tax cards list living space, and living space is not always heated space. In other words, if you have like a sun porch on the back of your house, the town might call that living space, but for the purposes of this program, you don't have to include that because that's not technically not heated space. And then you put in what you use for heat. That could be, in this case, this person here, 800 gallons of oil and also 2 cords of wood. Now, if you also had like some propane or some wood pellets in there too, unfortunately, it won't let you put that in there. You can only put in 2 types of heat. But if you did have a third type of heat, what you can do is you can just contact the utility. And what they'll do is they'll say, oh, well, if, for instance, if you had 2 tons of wood pellets, they'll say, okay, well, instead of putting in 2 tons of wood pellets, you can put in this many gallons of oil because it's the equivalent of that. So there's a way around that. And there's also a question here about electric heat. If you have electric heat in your house, you can hit yes, and then that'll change things too. And then you hit enter, and it gives you actually a little score, green, yellow, or red. In the old days, it was really easy. If you were anywhere in the green, you didn't get in. Anything over the green, you got in. Now, each utility has a different threshold or a different number to get in. So some people on the call today that live there might get in with a 7 because they have Eversource. But if you have Liberty, that same exact house wouldn't get in because in Liberty territory, you have to have a 10, which is more energy. The co-op is 8 right now. So it's a little confusing. It's not fair. I've complained, but that it doesn't go anywhere. So it is what it is. The different utilities have a different threshold. Some of the utilities have a new program. They're calling it the light program, for lack of a better term. It's sort of like Budweiser and Budweiser Light, I guess, or Miller and Miller Light. So for people who, let's say you're in Eversource territory and you put in all your information and you don't quite get a 7, or you get a 5 or a 6, they'll still let you into the program. The benefits might not be quite as good as they would be if you were in the full program. But it's still, worthwhile to go through it because you still get the audit and everything. So let's see. So that's what it looks like. And those numbers might change too, by the way. I mean, Eversource's was a year ago, it was 9, and then it was 8. Now it's 7. They keep changing them. So these are what they are right now as of this moment. It could be different, in a month or 2. So if you try to get in there and it says, sorry, you don't get in, like, don't completely give up, try again in a couple of months because your utility might change the number. This is kind of a sample of 1 page from the proposal that you might get if you did this program. So this person went through the program and they had a project on the left. You can see the total cost was about $10,000. It looks like about half of that was insulating the basement walls. 3,400 of it was the attic, reducing the leakage of the house, getting the blower door reading from 1,900 down to 1,700. That was $800. And it shows you there actually how much the utility is going to chip in for this project and how much the homeowner has to pay. So in this case, the utility is going to pay the full 6,000. That's the max. That's the most they'll pay. And then the homeowner ends up paying 4. Now, if that homeowner said, geez, I can't afford 4, I can do 2, we could always go in and like remove something from that. We don't have to do all the stuff that's in there. You can always tweak things a little bit, and you can change it around, and you can lower it, and you can raise it. One thing that I might mention too here, I don't think this would apply for anybody in your territory, but I had a customer last week in Portsmouth who has Unitil gas. So you need a 9 to get in for Unitil gas. But I think they had Eversource for electric. So they got into the program, and they're actually going to get 2 rebates, one from Unitil for $6,000 and one from Eversource for $6,000. So they're getting $12,000 from their utility for the project. And then they only have to pay 1 or 2. And their project is I think it was about 14,000. So in some situations where your electric, if you have natural gas and you have a different electric company, you can get 2 rebates. I should also mention this goes by your electric meter, not your address. So I know there's at least one house in Cornish we did a few years ago that had 4 electric meters because there were 4 apartments in this building. Each person had their own electric meter. So that the landlord got 4 rebates from Eversource. That's a lot of money. So it's not, and they all have the same address, but it's because there's 4 different electric meters. So good to know. There's also a program for low income folks. I don't know. We don't do as much work in this program as maybe we would like to, or we should, but they actually will pay more than that. Sometimes they're paying 100% of the cost of these projects for folks. The downside is, from what I understand, there's kind of a waiting period in some cases, depending on where you are for this program. So that's kind of the downside of this program. But there's the contact information there if you have interest in that program. I'm not going to talk too much about this because it's still up in the air, some of it, and it's all here in black and white for you to look at another time. But the new IRA bill does have some stuff in there that can really, really help out with stuff like this. The first one is just the tax credit, right? So in your federal tax for next year, if you got something done this year, you can get a really good rebate or a tax credit for this. The heat pump one, just that could be up to $2,000. Insulation is only up to $1,200, but hey, every little bit helps. You can even get $150 for your audit to help with that. And they are doing windows. You can get some credit for windows. So this would all be on your taxes, in the next year. Obviously, that's going to be dependent upon how much you owe in taxes. Like if you don't have any tax liability, a credit doesn't really do you much good. But for a lot of folks, this can really make a difference. The other part of the IRA bill has a couple different programs that unfortunately are still being worked out. They have to be done. The money's going to the states, and the state has to figure out how to spend it. And New Hampshire hasn't quite figured that out yet. So this is a program that they say will be up and running by late 2024. They were just hiring the people to run this program, I think, just even a month or 2 ago. So it's still sort of up and running, but a lot of different moving parts to this. But there also are going to be some rebates that you could get. Again, this is above and beyond New Hampshire Saves. If you do get into New Hampshire Saves, this could be separate from that. So there's definitely some work to be done on this, but you can see here, there's some pretty big numbers here too, in terms of some potential rebates that are coming out of this IRA bill once they sort of work out the details. And the third one is another program, again, late 2024, hopefully. They'll get this figured out, the New Hampshire Department of Energy, but this one is called the Homes Act. And this is sort of like New Hampshire Saves in a way. It's looking at the whole house. It's looking at, what they can rebate. In this case, it sort of does depend on your income. and it depends on how much energy it's going to save. The New Hampshire Saves program, they don't care if you make $1,000 a year or you make $1 million a year. If you use a lot of propane or oil or wood or whatever, if your house is using too much energy, you're going to get a rebate for that. It has nothing to do with your income. This program, has a component in it that is related to your income. So it can get a little complicated, as you can see, because they're looking at some different numbers and stuff here, but definitely some pretty impressive numbers once they get this up and running. The real big question is going to sort of be like, how is this program going to be administered? What is the audit involved? What kind of computer software? They're still ironing out all those things. So, I'd like to, think positively they're going to get this up and running sometime soon. So I think we're just about wrapped up. We covered all this different stuff. We talked about the real basic stuff. We went through the ABCs. We talked about getting some help from experts. Talked about the New Hampshire Saves program. If you know anybody in any other towns in New Hampshire, if you have friends and neighbors and that you think would benefit from this kind of workshop, you can give them this contact info for the people over at Paray, and they can help put together a workshop in their town. There's my contact information if you're wanting to get a hold of me for any reason. If you have any other questions that come, down the road, or something you didn't get a chance to talk to me about today, you can always email me there or give me a call. And then last, I'm going to leave you with a picture of, I think I have it here. It's one of the worst houses I've ever been in. That's Lake Winnipesaukee in the background there, by the way. I thought I was at the wrong house because this house was in the rebate program for the utility. And they obviously don't need the $4,000, but they got it because this house used so much propane. They had a massive, massive ice dam, and they had buckets in their living room catching the water that was coming in this house. And you can see the whole lake from end to end from their windows there. It was one of the biggest houses I've ever been in. Also one of the most expensive. It was also one of the worst. So, if your house is driving you crazy and costing you a lot of money to maintain, don't lose hope, because there's hope out there. And a lot of new houses like this have some of the issues that you're having, and some of them are even worse. So with that, I will stop talking for a while and see if anybody has any questions I can help answer.
Okay, we have two people, Charles Clark first and then Joanna. So Charles, if you want to ask.
Yeah, Vermont has a requirement for a heat exchanger. That was in effect January 1st, 2005. Is there any reason why New Hampshire isn't following that example?
A heat exchanger? Do you mean an HRV?
It was an exchanger. It was bringing in so much air per hour and exhausting so much air.
Yeah. So yeah, that would be an HRV or an ERV, a heat recovery ventilator, or ERV. That's the in that slide I showed back there. That's the way to get. That's the best way to sort of get balanced ventilation in your house. That's not required in New Hampshire. Eventually, I think we're probably going to get there. There's other ways you can do it. You can do it with a bathroom fan right now. If you have a really good high quality bathroom fan that's rated for continuous use, you can have a bathroom fan. That's how a lot of the Habitat for Humanity houses that I worked on in Plymouth about 10 years ago, well, maybe 15 years ago now. That's how they took care of the ventilation for that house. Unfortunately, what they did is they relied on the homeowner to use it. And that's never really a good idea, because people are known to not do things they're supposed to do and not understand the importance of it, or forget, or not want to run the fan because it costs money to run the fan. And they ended up having, some pretty bad moisture and mold issues in those homes. So then they ended up they changed them so that they just ran automatically, whether the person wanted them to run or not. And the problem kind of went away. But yeah, from a sort of theoretical point of view, an HRV is definitely the way to go. It adds cost to the construction of a house. In the long run, it saves money because you're able to build the house a lot tighter. So you're going to save money on the heating bills. So that little energy penalty you have for running that system sort of becomes a non-issue. I lived in a house that was super tight, super insulated. I just rented it. It was LEED certified, super insulated, super tight. They had an HRV. It worked pretty well, but some people in this development that I lived in also had issues too, because the system wasn't really designed correctly and they didn't use it right. So there's issues with those too sometimes, but that is definitely the direction I think that, especially new construction is going.
Yeah, I was told the reason, part of the reason was all the chemical material that are in new houses.
Yeah, that's definitely a concern. And honestly, we don't know a whole lot about that stuff, right? Like we know that like rugs off gas and the plastic off gas, like almost everything in your house is off gassing, whether you can smell it or not. A lot of times it's stuff you can't smell that's the worst for you. So yeah, having that air exchange, should definitely help with that. Like I said, most people's houses in New Hampshire, if they're 10, 20, 200 years old, there's so much air going in and out of that house that, the HRV is really not necessary. I've been in homes that have an HRV. The homeowner sometimes doesn't even know what it is. They're like, oh yeah, that thing was there when I moved in. We've never even turned it on. I don't know what it does. And then you run the blower door and the house is so leaky. You're like, geez, I don't even know why you have this thing either, because your house is so leaky. You don't need this thing. And sometimes they're put in very poorly too. So yeah, there's definitely a learning curve with that. Some people are putting them in when they're not necessary. There are people that are building houses that probably should have them and don't have them. You can retrofit a house with one of those, but it's definitely a little bit harder to do because a full robust HRV system it's got that heat exchanger unit, but then it has supplies that go to a bunch of different rooms, usually the bedrooms. And then it has returns that come usually from bathrooms and kitchens, because that's where the most sort of stale areas. So obviously it's a little bit easier to put one of those in during construction than it is after the fact, but it definitely can be done.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Sure.
Okay, Joanna.
Hi, Ted. I'll be real quick.
Sure.
I'm interested, as a contractor, if your company or others are hiring more and training more workers because of the Inflation Reduction Act incentives that are going to be coming down.
That's a good question. We'd love to. We need to. I mean, that's the scary thing is that even the New Hampshire Saves program right now has more funding than they can spend. And most of that is because of the number of contractors and the number of crews that each contractor has. It's not necessarily a function of how many people in the state need the work done. And now you add in tens of millions of dollars that are coming into the state that are going to be going through these state programs. The demand is, there's a huge disconnect between what the insulation and air sealing industry in New Hampshire can do right now compared to what they want us to be able to do in the next couple of years. So there's definitely a lot of pushes around the state for training and things like that. It's a real tough nut to crack though, because it's not like there's tons of people out there just waiting to get into these jobs and they just need training. They need places to live that they can afford. There's so many other sort of issues that go into that. It's definitely something that's been, is being talked about by a lot of different people. I know the company I work for, just us, like we would love to have one or two more crews of people out there each day working, but it's just really, really hard to find the people. And that's only going to get worse. Like I said, once all this money starts getting distributed and there's a higher demand out there, and maybe it's just going to be like a real, hopefully a short but steep learning curve or a big adjustment as it might just take some time for people to realize, hey, this is like, something we should probably get into. But that's a good question. And I've heard that from other contractors too, that, almost everyone has trouble, finding and maintaining, workers to do this work. Sorry to go backwards, but I was just thinking about it. The question before this was about HRVs and ventilation and that kind of thing. And I couldn't help but remember that it's actually, I think it's somebody in Cornish or that area, somewhere around in the Connecticut River Valley. A few years ago, I did a blower door test and an audit for this fella, and his house had a lot of spray foam in it, and spray foam tends to be very good at sealing up houses. And I ran the blower door, and the house was really, 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 really tight. It was so tight that he was having issues like the bathroom fan wouldn't really exhaust anymore, wouldn't exhaust the steam from the bathroom because it couldn't, like, it had nowhere to pull air from. Once I cracked the window, then all of a sudden the bath fan could get rid of all the steam that I had built up in the bathroom, but not without cracking a window would that work. He had some mold on the windowsills. It was almost a brand new house too. Anyway, long story short, after running the numbers, I was like, you really should have some kind of mechanical ventilation system in this house. And then right at the very end, he said, oh, maybe that's what this is about. Let me show you something. And I was thinking, oh, geez, what is he about to show me? Because it's like, it's been an hour and a half and he's showing this to me now. And he brought me around and he showed me there were 6 different places in the house that the builder had literally just drilled a 4-inch hole through the wall to the outdoors. And they put like a little damper on it with a pull chain, and you could pull the chain and it would open, and then you could pull the chain and it would shut.
Oh my God.
And some of them were in closets. Some of them were like in the bedrooms. They were just sort of willy-nilly all around the house. And he said, what do you think of that? And I said, I've never seen anything like this. I've never heard of anything like this. Like, this is definitely not an approved way of getting ventilation in your house. I mean, you might as well just open up a window, I think what happened was he probably contracted with his builder to build the house, and then he read about spray foam and he said, oh yeah, I want you to spray foam the basement. And then he said, oh, well, geez, if we're spray foam in the basement, why don't we do the walls too? And they did, like, so he, in other words, I think he changed the building so much that the builder started getting worried or scared near the end that it was going to be so tight that he was going to have all these ventilation and moisture issues. And he didn't know how to solve the problem. So he just cut these holes in the house. So, and I even opened all of the 6 openings. And even with all 6 of those open, the number that I was getting on the blower door was still so small, meaning the house was still so tight that it still needed even more like ventilation. And, just having like an open hole like that is really not a very smart way of doing it. There's no heat recovery, there's no heat exchange or anything like that in there. So that was definitely kind of an eye-opening experience for me, but it just goes to show you, that, these days people are learning on the fly sometimes, and they're trying things that are sometimes not very well advised.
Okay, we were supposed to end at 8 and it's now 8:18. So one more question from Abdul, and then we'll have to end.
Okay.
All right. Appreciate you guys. Ted, once again, appreciate the call of the workshop. I just have 2 questions for you.
Sure.
I heard you got solar, which I was very happy when you said that, because I'm looking to get solar myself. I am working with a company at the moment called Team Sunshine, if you heard it. But any recommendation what I should look out for when I should get my solar project done?
It's really hard to say. I would say, I would just, make sure you get at least a couple different quotes, because, these companies, there's some really good ones out there. There's some that I've heard that are not as good as others for various reasons, whether it's customer service or shoddy, equipment or this and that, or not getting their paperwork, ready. So I would do your homework, get a couple different quotes. And also the different companies will sort of look at things a little differently. Like, I have a customer right now in Peterborough who has 3 different quotes for solar. One company wants to do a ground mount system in the backyard on a rack, but she'd have to cut down some trees. The other company wants to put it on the roof, but she only really has east and west facing roofs. So they want to sort of put more panels than they normally would because they're not in such a great spot, but they're going to be east and west. And then the other company said, look, you have a gable end wall facing south, so we can build like this little rack off your house, like a 45-degree thing. We can put panels on there. So there's three sort of pretty significantly different solutions, for the same problem. And she was asking me for advice on that too. I'm like, geez, I don't know. Like that's a tough one. There's advantages and disadvantages to each one. And it can be really tough to decide sometimes. So I would, look for references and, check references and look around at different companies. But yeah, I encourage you to keep going forward. Like I said, I would make sure that your house is really insulated well first and sealed up well. That's the most important thing, because that's a lot less expensive. And there's no sense in having solar and being able to brag that you're like, I have no electric bill, but you're burning 1,200 gallons of oil or something to keep your house warm. Like that just seems like it doesn't make a lot of sense. So do what you can to lower the lower all your heating bills, get your house insulated, sealed up well, and then then pursue the solar.
All right. And then just one last thing is there a Facebook group that you guys have where you talk about this and then constant tips and, little changes that happen over time, or nothing like that?
I don't know of anything on Facebook. The New Hampshire Saves website has quite a bit of information on just on their programs, but also just on things in general. I would also say I'll put a plug in for the Efficiency Maine program. The Efficiency Maine program is the rebate program over there, and they have a similar type of rebate program. Interestingly, over there, you don't have to qualify for it. You don't have to produce any kind of heating bills or anything. But they have a really good website with tons of good information about what is a heat pump, how does it work, what are the myths, and heat pump, water heaters, electric cars, insulation. They have all sorts of good resources on there for people just to learn more about this stuff. Whether you're a Maine resident or not, and whether you're going to get a rebate or not, there's some of those resources you might find really, really helpful.
All right, appreciate it, man. Thank you.
Sure.
Joanna, do you have any final words?
I just want to thank you, Ted, for an excellent presentation. I really, really appreciate it. And I've heard several of these before, but I always learn more, and especially from you. So thank you so much.
Good. I'm glad you liked it. Yeah, we kind of revamped it a little bit this year. We took out some stuff because obviously there's a lot of information, and it's always hard to kind of figure out exactly what to keep in and what not to. And there's certain things that the utilities, you make sure that we put in there. For instance, there used to be a whole section about phantom loads and vampire loads and stuff. And we kind of got rid of that because we're like, yeah, it's, in the big picture, it's really not that big of a deal. We mention it, but we're not going to spend all this time on it. So yeah, I appreciate that. If anybody has any feedback on the program, we definitely, would appreciate that. I gave you my email there. And hopefully you guys can, make this recording available to folks who didn't get to come tonight. And then, like I said, the slide deck is there too. You can feel free to refer people to that. And I hope to get out to Cornish and see some of you guys one day for energy audit sometime.
Thank you again.
Thank you. You all have a good night.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Ted.
You as well. Take care, guys.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, Evan.
Thanks, Ted.
Thank you.
Sorry, in terms of the recording, guys, just to clarify, Ted, are we